So I've heard you say that maybe you've started to nibble into gold. So it's a good thing.
I have, yeah.
He's nibbling into gold. By the way, how is gold doing these days? It's up. I said back when gold was right down here around 4,000 that would be an excellent entry place for gold. Long term, I think it's always a good time to buy gold. But it's better to enter gold, let's say on a 5-year period. It's better to enter gold like here, or here, or here, at a relative low. And 4,000 a few weeks ago was a relative low. Probably still a good buy at 4,500. It would have been an even better buy at 4,000.
I about a week ago, not because of him. I haven't spoken to him about this topic. He used to tell me about hard assets years ago before it became sexy again. But no, so my computer died. I decided to look into gold because it's just gone too far. Like, come on. Like from
$40 trillion of debt from the U.S. government. It's never going to be paid back. Not in real terms. It's going to be paid back by printing.
what's happening in Japan to the new D-Day sanctions. I don't think they'll go anywhere, by the way. I think it's more of a facade. To the Operation Twist with the long end of the curve, to obviously the Iran war. And now Trita Parsi was telling me just before we went live how he thinks there's an above 50% chance, he didn't give an exact number, but above 50% that the US and Iran will be back at it. A resumption of the war after the midterms. Which I just told him, like, but Trita, it just doesn't make sense. I don't see a path where that makes sense. There was another report, my computer's dead, so I can't see the report now, but there's another report on how depleted the munitions are in Europe and how Europe and NATO is not ready. NATO and Europe is not ready for any Russian attack, let alone a sustained attack by Russia. Even one missile, they're not that prepared for. And they cannot deal with a sustained attack. They're in the same situation as Ukraine. I'm looking at this, I'm like, Trita, who in their right mind would even consider a war with Iran? And he
I was saying that too. I'm actually curious to go back and watch my videos right before the Iran war and see what I was saying. I was saying, there's no way Trump can be that stupid. I'm pretty sure I actually said those words. There's no way Trump could be stupid enough to bomb Iran's supreme leader. But I was wrong. He was that stupid.
answered in a very astute way as always. He's like, Mario, who would have thought they would have started round 2 in July when war didn't make sense?
That's the exact same thing I say about nukes. The discussion we hear about Trump considering to use tactical nuclear weapons against Iran. It seems insane. It seems there's no way Trump would be stupid enough to do that. But then again, bombing Iran's supreme leader, that level of stupid is about the same level of stupid as deciding to use tactical nukes in this Iran war against Iran. Once Trump has established that there's nothing too stupid for him to do, it's hard to completely discount anything anymore.
Sense. I'm like, all right, touche. Good response.
Or round 1.
or round last year, whatever you call it, 12 days.
By the way, a lot of people think about this as a left-right issue, like whether you go after Iran's supreme leader or not. To me, it never was that. It's just stupidity. You don't start a war that you lose. That's just stupid. It's not left or right. It's just Trump had no plan. You can tell that by the fact that this is what Trump did. He bombed the supreme leader. Then he let Iran export record amounts of oil at record prices for a month and a half. And after that, he said, okay, now we're going to blockade Iran and stop it from exporting its oil and starve it of cash. That's like feeding someone a banquet, a feast, and then locking them in a room and saying, I'm going to starve you to death. Well, that would have been a lot more effective if you locked them in the room right away without giving them the feast first. That's why I mean there was no plan for this Iran war. If there had been a plan, the blockade on Iran oil exports would have started day 1. But that didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, look, if Europe gets more entangled in this, of course, we've seen all that, like the UK just can't seem to wait. They're going to release their Storm Shadow like plans so Ukraine can build their own. And they're talking about drafts now. And just some minister came out and said maybe people should be prepared. Hey, it's my shtick. I'm not averse to it. I think everybody should have some food and water. But when your own government's saying, hey, there could be some hard times on the way, you can just feel there's sort of...
Hard times on the way. Oh boy, is there going to be hard times on the way. It's in terms of food next year. it's going to be so bad. Farmers have been hit by fertilizer prices doubling, diesel prices doubling, and basically just a fertilizer shortage, because sulfur came out of the Gulf, Persian Gulf, and that's not coming out anymore. Fertilizer was coming out of there; it's not coming out anymore. So next year, also to make it even worse, Ukraine, one of the biggest grain exporters, is now blockaded, and its harvest this fall is just going to rot in the fields. They have no way to get it out, to move it out. So, like, its exports are going to be, even what it managed to reroute, it's going to be like a fraction, maybe like less than a fourth of what it was normally. And that's millions of tons of grains off the market at a time where the harvest this fall is going to be down everywhere. So next year, you're going to have riots. Do you remember the riots in Egypt? It happened about 2011, 2012. Yes, that? Well, that's what happened. If you want to know why that happened, it's very clear. Where's my little graph? It should be right here. Okay. Here we go. Sorry. Why it happened is into February 2012. This is wheat prices. The price of wheat. It went from, about $4 to $9. $9 in February 2011. And it stayed high. And so that's why you had food riots afterwards. That soaring price of wheat. It caused riots around the world. You're going to have that. It's probably a year and a half from now. But the end of 2027, you're going to have riots across Asia, across Africa about food. Millions will starve. But that was baked in as soon as Trump bombed Iran's supreme leader and the Strait of Hormuz was closed.
Itching to get into war, because why wouldn't they? The UK's fiscal situation is an emergency. They're swirling the bowl. And this is a very common time for politicians to think, do we level with the people and admit we have to go through austerity, or do we blame somebody, we go to war? It's kind of a European tradition. I could see that happening again. Not for good.
Not unique to Europeans. Everywhere in the world, leaders get in trouble. They try to turn to war to rally the people and hide the problems.
Reasons.
When you say see that happening again, you mean a resumption of the war with Iran?
No, of Europe dragging itself into war with Russia.
Okay, yeah, that's the other worst case scenario. But that's I was just having a discussion with my co-host Brandon. I'll get you to have a discussion with him Sunday. He's great, and he's very convinced that Russia would not strike NATO. I'm leaning in that direction, but not as much as him. He's very, very convinced they won't.
I could go either way on that. There's so much anger in Russia. There's so much provocation from the West. And you have Russia just warning the UK that they might get struck. The situation's more dangerous than at any point in this Ukraine conflict up till now.
But when foreign ministry talks about threatening to strike today, not Medvedev, it's foreign ministry of Russia saying we will strike
Exactly.
the munition warehouses or manufacturers, I think warehouses, British munitions in Ukraine and outside of Ukrainian territory. You can't not take such a threat seriously. And meanwhile, as we're speaking, you've got raid alerts across Kiev, and you've got today has been the most amount of air raid alerts in Kiev since the start of the invasion of Ukraine. On March 1st, 2022, there were 12 air raid alerts in a day. Today, there have already been 13, and another attack is planned tonight. So Ukraine is just getting pummeled. It's just so sad to see.
Well, it is, and it's pretty much obviously a lost cause at this point. The only terms to be decided is how much land does Russia keep and why. But otherwise, it's clear that that's a lost cause.
That's an update on the panic situation in Kiev. You have a mass exodus of the capital of Ukraine. So this is a highway out of Kiev, the capital, just non-stop packed. And here is a train station. Kiev railroad station is overcrowded. Hundreds of people spend the entire day waiting in the underground passage for trains, which are delayed up to 15 hours due to constant alarms. So, yeah, it's like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Kiev is emptying out. Out of desperation, people are trying to walk to the left bank. Yeah, Kiev has also been stuck in traffic jams for almost a day due to alarms. Most difficult situation is between the right and left banks of the river. Yep. So, Ukraine, Kiev, situation is not great.
It's been for a long time, obviously. But now, I woke up yesterday morning. It's still August here, but first chill in the air, right? And so this now is going to become serious in Europe because they failed to...
Natural gas. Europe cut themselves off of cheap Russian natural gas. Then the Iran war cut them off from cheap Qatar natural gas. And so they just don't have natural gas for this winter.
Fill their natural gas stores, right? Germany in particular, they're coming in really low on the energy they need to make it through the winter, being warm and happy. And there's no chance that they can import the LNG at this stage. So they're going to have to figure out how to sort of scrimp. And if weather's on their side, maybe it's not that bad. But if weather gets a little chilly or is, a little bit different than average, maybe colder, they're going to have real problems on their hands. And self-inflicted wound, shot themselves in the foot.
Yes.
I don't know what it is with Germans and energy, but they have trouble with the whole story. But all of Europe is really kind of in a tight spot right now. And I don't think they can afford to go any further with Russia at this point. They're going to have to come to some rapprochement and find a way to make nice. They have to.
That's exactly why I've been optimistic for a while on the Russia-Ukraine war that it will be coming to an end. Less so now after the Iran war.
Just one more graphic on that situation in Europe. Winter is coming and Europe isn't ready. Germany gas storage is only 47% full. Netherlands, a pathetic 38%. Europe cut themselves off from cheap Russian gas and now is paying the price. Well, it's not just cutting themselves from cheap Russian gas. It's that plus the Iran war cutting themselves off from cheap Middle East gas. Then there's no cheap gas at all. You have, look at this, 38% Netherlands. Poland is doing the best in terms of not being prepared. They'll make it through the winter. Austria, Hungary, they're doing pretty good too. Italy is ready. The EU overall is at 58%, but Germany, 47%. Oh, Ukraine is really screwed in so many ways. And Slovakia is also in trouble. So Germany, Netherlands, and Slovakia are in the most trouble if we have a cold winter.
Because the US has weakened NATO to such an extent where it could be a good thing because it pressures Europe to pressure Ukraine to accept a deal. But it's also a bad thing because it just emboldens Putin so much more. Now, my co-host also is worried about, so Brandon is worried about, he said, Mario, I'm worried now Russia's considering trying to capture Kyiv. I really don't think so.
I disagree because drones. Drones. Even if Russia takes all the territory that they want to hold permanently, like Odessa, the Donbass, they don't want the rest of Ukraine, but they absolutely don't want all these drones flying into Russia. Right now, all of Europe is making drones and then launching them from from Ukraine into Russia. It's an excuse. It's a launching platform. It's a magical place where normally, if let's say the UK launched a Storm Shadow missile into Russia and hit a refinery, that would be war between the UK and Russia. But if the UK ships its missile over to Ukraine, then fires it into Russia, then it magically, there's no war between the UK and Russia. It's this magical excuse to unload all your ammunition into Russia and they're not allowed to hit back. That's how Europe views Ukraine. And so even if Russia takes all the territory it wants, as long as you have the current regime in Kiev, the drones and the missiles won't stop, I don't think. I think that they just keep on launching missiles and drones, destroying stuff into Russia endlessly. And the only way to stop that is to take Kiev and to get rid of the current regime in Ukraine. Because like that, the magical launching platform where all of Europe can just launch them ammunitions deep into Russia without triggering war. It's, it's a playground thing, the kindergarten thing where I'm allowed to hit you, but you're not allowed to hit me. That's what the entire Europe is doing with Russia. They're just hitting Russia nonstop. Saying, you can't hit us. It was Ukraine. It was Ukraine. Because of Ukraine, you can't hit us.
There's a report today that, obviously these are biased numbers, but the head of the CIA was in Moscow potentially meeting Putin. And according to, I don't know who that is, Wall Street Journal or Axios, Trump told Axios, oh no, that's another one. So the head of the CIA went there. I can't find it. I'll try to find it in a bit. But he went there to warn NATO, to warn Russia not to keep the war going. That was the warning to him. And not to...
Yeah, because the West is desperate. CIA is desperate. Ukraine is on the verge of losing its fortress belt. It's what has bogged Russia down in Ukraine all this time is that fortress belt in the Donbass. Once they're past that, it's open fields till Kiev.
To strike NATO and telling Putin, it's like, hey, you're running... you're losing this war. You're barely capturing territory. And he said the territory captured by Russia is only 1% more than it was a year ago, whatever he said. The life expectancy on the soldier on the ground is 30.
By the way, both these facts are nonsense.
5 minutes. The Russian soldier. Now, I'm assuming those.
If those facts were true, the CIA director would not be visiting Russia, begging them to stop.
Numbers exaggerated, but you can't exaggerate that much because on the ground you get a rough ID, bias here and there by small percentage points. But that's a valid point in general, is that the Russians are losing a lot of people now. Is it 1.5 million or is it only 500,000? I have no idea. All different sources say different numbers, but they are losing anything in the thousands is a lot of people, and they're barely capturing territory. So if that's the case, that's a positive thing because Putin, I know people say he's crazy. I don't think he's crazy. He wants this war to end.
In terms of capturing territory, there's one good way to know how it's going. See this deep state map. I've turned to it several times in the past because it's run by the Ukrainians, so you can be at least sure that it's right. It might be too conservative, not showing enough Russian advance, but the Russian advance it does show, you can be sure they're real. Well, they've announced they're going to stop updating their maps. So let's see. That there's still a little bit of movement, but they've said in an announcement, it was only a few days ago. Yeah, barely any change. So this must have been their last big update. There hasn't been anything since then on the front lines. So this is no longer reliable to show the Russian advance. Russia is advancing so fast that they've stopped announcing what territories are being captured by the Russians.
Now, the Ukrainian side, maybe they'd be happy to see Ukraine's military achievements. Everyone expected them to fall in a few days or weeks, and the fact they're still fighting now, they're one of the most powerful military in Europe after Russia. That would have emboldened the Europeans, but now after the big punch in the face of the US by Iran, I think the Europeans now are dealing with the new reality, and I think the new reality urgently requires them, urgently, to not only end the war in Ukraine, but make peace with Russia. They need Russia on their side for Europe to kind of be back on the world stage. Their military has just been so dependent on the US for so many decades. No one really cares about anything they have to say on the geopolitical table.
Well, in this story, energy is everything. Always is. So Europe's got to sort that out and quickly. Obviously, they're going to figure out that the green energy stuff they were pursuing is a non-starter. It just doesn't work. They gave it a good run. Didn't pan out. So they're going to have to come up with a new energy policy. And there's not one I can think of where it doesn't make the most sense to pipe in gas from Russia and to bring in oil from Russia. They're your land partner over there, further to the east. But I do see that Ukraine and Iran are similar stories because Ukraine is really outmatched by Russia. Russia's a lot larger, right? And Russia's willing to take losses militarily. That's clear. And it shows that a scrappy underdog with drones can really make a difference. Like it equalizes things a lot. It's kind of like the old, the Revolutionary War in the United States. Like what happened? Well, they refused to line up in rank file, which the British were just excelling at, and the British were just confused. Why wouldn't you just show up like we want you to, and fight us the way we're good at, shooting at us behind stone walls and all that. So now I think drones have really leveled the playing field, right? And missiles really have leveled the.
Yep. To a big extent for now, until someone figures out a good anti-drone strategy for dealing with the small drones and the medium-sized drones. That will eventually happen. And the whole dynamics of war will change again.
Playing field. That's the lesson. Same lesson in Ukraine against Russia and Iran against the U.S. So that's a huge political realignment. And that's why I was a little bit shocked. I'd love to know what you think about this. But, we had that new axis of mutual defense, right? So Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. And then next thing I'm reading, they're like, oh, and we want to invite Iran to be part of this. It's like, I can't think the United States or Israel thinks that's a good outcome here.
Yeah. So the report about Iran came from the head of one news outlet that is very close to the Iranian parliament. Just want to give you context because that was a pretty big announcement. There's been a lot of rumors about it, not a lot of indication, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do give an offer. Some people saying the offer was already made to Iran, but I wouldn't be surprised if an offer is made sooner than one would expect. Obviously, that pretty messed up news, especially for Israel. The US, it doesn't need to be bad news for the US. The US made it bad news for itself because Ambassador Tom Barak was telling me how Trump's goal was to, as we've seen in Europe, to have countries take care of their own defense rather than piggybacking on America's back. Great objective, great ambitions. Obviously, this war with Iran achieved that objective, but in a really bad way because they're kind of building their own defense.
Hey, Proton Snail. This is where I remember the UN. WEF. What does WEF stand for again? I know it. Yeah. World Economic Forum. Yes, I'm blanking on it. Yep. I remember UN and World Economic Forum list of predictions. They've made so many predictions over the years about everything, so I don't know which predictions specifically you're referring to, but nice to have you here. Yo, 07. Adagio wanted to do a snail making the 07 symbol as one of our emotes. I'm probably gonna accept becoming affiliate next week at some point, and so I need to figure everything out for that and get the emotes. I was thinking, but we haven't done that one yet. We're still working on it. Let's continue the video.
Be bad news for the US. The US made it bad news for itself because Ambassador Tom Barak was telling me how Trump's goal was to, as we've seen in Europe, to have countries take care of their own defense rather than piggybacking on America's back. Great objective, great ambition.
Thing is, the United States benefits hugely from NATO. NATO was a way to force all of Europe to buy U.S. weapons, basically. We controlled or had huge influence on the weapon acquisition system in Europe. And through NATO, Europe bought billions and billions and billions and billions of U.S. weapons. So ending U.S. involvement in NATO, forcing Europe to rely more on itself, it might buy a lot less U.S. weapons, and our trade deficit is already pretty bad already.
Ambitions. Obviously, this war with Iran achieved that objective, but in a really bad way because they're kind of building their own defense alliance, but completely away from the U.S. and with one of America's enemies. So at the detriment of the U.S. So Barak did say, though, that this is actually, he's trying to twist it into a good thing. And it can be a good thing if the U.S., I don't know how the hell they could do it after killing their leader and bombing the hell out of them. I was saying it early on before the war. The U.S., one of the biggest strategic steps they could take is improve relations with Iran. It's better for Iran, it's better for the US, it's better for the world, it's better for everybody. It's worse for China because China, you're pushing Iran closer and closer to China. Now, I think that ship has sailed. You can't bomb a country like Trump did and try to get closer with Iran. But it's bad news for Israel. Maybe that's why they're not. That's what makes this this hope very, very
Well, we've seen.
Yeah, well, Israel's long-term prospects, I don't think, are looking very good right now. A nation that depends so much on foreign aid, turning public opinion in the United States so much against it. Not a good strategy for survival.
I've seen at least two, I would say, politically relevant people inside of Israel. Most recently, Jonathan Pollard, the former spy,
I hate him.
talking about how as soon as Iran is flattened, obviously Turkey's going to be a problem, and then Egypt, right? So they're just already looking for new enemies. At least Jonathan Pollard is. And I saw one other foreign minister for Israel echo the Turkey thoughts. I'm like, Turkey?
Well, a good chunk of Egypt is part of Greater Israel, so for those who believe in the Greater Israel project, Egypt is going to be on the table at some point. So is Saudi Arabia.
Gosh, haven't we bitten off enough here in this story? So if that security pact then includes Egypt.
Though Saudi Arabia, yes, it's also part of the Greater Israel, but good thing for Saudi Arabia, though, is it's mostly desert with no resources, is a part of Greater Israel that, let's say, it's part of Greater Israel that Israel is least interested in taking.
Like you can start to see that aren't we getting back to the same conditions of the Arab uprising as it was back in 73, which is like, hey, if it's us against them, we'll put aside our Shia Sunni stuff for now. Kind of looks like it's us against you. That's how it's sort of shaping up. And I haven't seen the cooler heads in this story yet. Not on our side, not on Israel's side. So I don't know where we're at yet.
Talking about Israel, just before we went live, they bombed Damascus again. So,
Yeah.
if there's any more updates on that. So Syrian president is doing a lot of positive steps. He just signed a decree dissolving the SDF, the Kurds, the Kurdish group, which everyone thought would never happen. And he's now made Kurdish, I think, compulsory to learn in primary school. So
Given he is a former ISIS member, and ISIS was the one who genocided 1 million Christians in Syria, I don't really like the new Syrian president. But it sounds like he, so far, is doing good things in that he managed to disarm the Kurds without, hopefully, a massacre happening. And he's keeping the country together. But we'll have to wait and see. I don't fully trust him given his history.
the Kurds more right. So he's doing a lot of positive steps. And then to see Israel bomb Damascus, according to some reports, they're not going to have any friends that way. And they keep bombing Lebanon and escalating in Lebanon. Let's talk. I want to talk about the energy situation. How's it look?
Damascus is in Syria, by the way. It's one of the big cities in Syria. So, yeah. Syria is what Israel wants the entire Middle East to look like. It's a place where Israel, ever since the fall of Assad, has just gone in and just bombs whatever it wants, whenever it wants. That's what it wants. It wants to be able to bomb Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, whenever it wants, wherever it wants, at any time, without anyone being able to put up a fight.
Looking like. Also, I want to link it to a report that came out today by the Wall Street Journal. No, the Atlantic. The Trump administration wants the Iran war to fade away from the headlines before the midterms. One advisor said, we're just trying to hang on until the
Yeah, hang on till the midterms. I don't think it's going to work. You started this bloody stupid Iran war like 9 months before the midterms. Worst possible time, because 9 months is just about time for the oil to really start hitting. Like, just check this. Diesel price. Oh, diesel shortage. Yeah. Refining margin. Well, that's overall a good indication of, yeah, diesel has never been higher. It's going up higher and higher. They can manipulate oil, but they can't change the price at the pump.
midterms. As the conflict continues and gas prices remain high and actively rising, Republicans are increasingly concerned about losing control of Congress, which has prompted Trump to focus on sanctions and economic pressure rather than continued military escalation. And Trita told me as well in our conversation is that what the administration is trying to do is...
We have 3 whole months till the midterm, basically. There's no way that the situation won't get worse before then, economically speaking. SPR is reaching the bottom of the barrel. Yeah. China He's going to start buying oil again to refine diesel. And yeah, prices are going to go up and up.
Put the blame of inflation on something else. Their goal is to make sure that Iran is nowhere on any headlines, as little as possible.
That's impossible. Everyone drives by gas stations. Everyone fills up their car with gas. They can see the prices every time they go to the gas station. And they know why prices are going up at the gas station. And they know that high prices at the gas station makes high prices of everything else. So you can't. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all of the time.
Possible as they get closer to the midterms, which gives an opportunity, by the way, for Iran to use that to their advantage. That's a big lever that they've just offered Iran. That's a different discussion. But would love to get your thoughts on the state of the energy market globally, the statement by the report by The Atlantic on Trump wanting Iran out of the way before the midterms. And there was a report yesterday by Axios, whatever, that Rubio told Gulf allies or American allies in the region, that the U.S. is not planning to attack Iran before the midterms.
For the midterm. So
I agree with that. Yeah. Trump, at this point, it'd be stupid to start any more military stuff with the midterm so close. So, yeah, that part of it, yeah. No more bombing or big bombing campaigns by the United States before the midterms.
just spill the beans, give it all away. So nothing's really changed in the energy story since we last talked, in the sense that we're watching inventories deplete all over the place, finished products in particular. In the United States, diesel is now in critically short supply, particularly in certain areas. New England, where I live, is going to be particularly hard hit because one of the main refineries up in Canada, St. John's, just shut down for maintenance. Takes 300,000 barrels per day offline, and we're already critically short here, and very near all-time highs ever, which we hit in 2022. So that I don't see that going away by midterms at this stage because there's just so much shortage. Now, we just heard Trump is called the refinery heads in. He wants to talk to them. I don't know what you're going to say. Like, they can't run harder. They're already running very close to 100% capacity utilization. Can't run much harder than that without risking, catastrophic failure at some point. They've already been deferring maintenance to keep, going. I think he's going to say, hey, why don't you just charge people less? Which means he doesn't understand how the actual oil markets work.
Doesn't work. You have a quantity of diesel, then you have demand that's above that. If you lower prices, you create shortages because some people overconsume. No, it's supply and demand. The prices of diesel are where it is because the supply of diesel is down, and there's no fixing that.
Or, these people have a product and people bid for it, and you sell to the highest person. So what's he going to tell them? No, sell to the lowest bidder? It's a weird inversion. It's not capitalism. Let's start with that, right? And so very tight here, very tight in Europe. I'm hearing rumblings and rumors that in Europe, they're having to go further and further afield to now land shipments of things, particularly diesel. And of course, there, the big story is Russia, whose refinery capacity every day, Mario, I wake up, it's like another refinery's been hit or re-hit. Or
they're getting repaired at the same time as they're getting hit, but every time a new one gets hit, it does take it offline for a few days or a few weeks. So Russia is not a reliable exporter of diesel anymore.
Re-hit. And so Russia's still in a position of importing diesel, not exporting. So we just see general tightness for products across the landscape.
Russia importing diesel. Like, how screwed up is
know.
that world? When we get to a stage where Russia is importing diesel, soon Saudi's importing crude oil. Like, what the hell is going
Greenland's importing ice cubes. It's weird.
Exactly.
Yeah. The biggest exporter of diesel, one of the biggest, is now importing diesel because of Ukraine. And Russians are furious about this, by the way. That's why the risk of escalation is so great in Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
It's terrible. No, but that story hasn't changed. So that's the ticking clock in this story. And they can try and push Iran off the landscape by November, keep it out of the headlines. But the headline's going to be at the gas pump. And particularly here in New England, where I live, a lot of people still heat with oil. It's kind of archaic, but it's true. So heating oil is a big thing. And people I know personally have sort of deferred buying it because it was so expensive. But now it's even more expensive. And sooner or later, that's really going to translate into, real pain for people. And that fuels inflation. And there's nothing they can do about that. I see much higher inflation coming. And it's for
Oh, yeah, there's so much inflation built up. Not only because the higher fuel prices, that hasn't been priced into goods yet, but next year, the food crisis. Going to push everything soaring up. A lot of inflation.
for a variety of reasons, not least of which is, of course, we have this cost push stuff from the diesel, energy side. But still, economically, the United States government is deficit spending like unbelievable amounts. And
Yeah, and there's that side. The money supply is increasing, and the physical supply of diesel and food is decreasing. No. Prices are going up, 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 up.
talking about $1.5 trillion for Department of War, talking about like there just doesn't seem to be any fiscal restraint whatsoever. So we've seen a number of very large op-eds come out in the last few days, in the Wall Street Journal, in Bloomberg, talking about the bond vigilantes are back. And they're scary people, but we haven't seen them in probably 25 years. But the bond vigilantes will come out and make your interest costs go higher because they believe inflation is coming. They lost faith in the idea that the government has fiscal restraint. And the only way to impose that fiscal restraint is by making the cost of borrowing higher. And then the government has to deal with that. So we're seeing those rumblings that there's a little change afoot, and big news, right? So we saw Scott Bessent do not one, not two, but 3 different interventions over the past 3 weeks, 1 in the yen and then 2 in the Treasury market. And that tells us something. It tells us that he called up the Federal Reserve and said, hey, can you guys intervene for me? And they said, no. So now he has to do something, because you can imagine the meetings, right? He's in there with Trump. Trump says, get interest rates down. And he's like, okay, what do I have to do? And it's pretty clear that the interest rates on the long end are pretty tightly correlated with the price of oil, right? So something I speculated about, Ratcliffe goes over there, really weird, right? They have all their transponders on, a C-17 Heavy, a diplomatic plane, like just broad daylight, like with flashing strobes and sparklers, like we're coming, and I couldn't really, to communicate something that potentially was as simple as a phone call or sending the station chief over, or they could have been quiet, they went noisy, okay? Beyond that, I don't actually know what was said. But I did note that just hours after Ratcliffe was there was this news item that came out in a Russian newspaper that said a peace deal is imminent, and oil tanked $4.50 that night, and yields went down instead of up.
I saw.
Right?
I saw. I didn't see the report that peace is imminent. I didn't see that news report. It's interesting that you spotted that. That's interesting.
I mean, it's just, listen, it could be something, but that was a little too convenient, So I'm starting to get the sense that the U.S. Treasury, Bessent, is starting to struggle with some reality behind the scenes, which is that we've probably pissed off a bunch of foreign people who might have bought it and held our debt, right?
About the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, this is the Federal Reserve's website. I haven't done it this way. I just wanted to show you that this Federal Reserve's website, June 2003, transcript, put options. Alternatively, we could sell put options on long-term Treasury securities at strike prices associated with desired long-term yields. This is, I think, one of the most shocking Federal Reserve transcript that should have been in every newspaper. It's the Fed going out and selling insurance on treasuries and saying treasuries will not fall in value. Secretly, by the way, because no one knows they're doing this. And I guarantee you they've started doing this because this was a presentation. This plan was, if ever we reduce interest rates to zero, which happened in 2008 financial crisis, how do we boost the economy then? Because the Federal Reserve, every time there's a recession, it needs to boost the economy by lowering interest rates. But if you lower interest rates to zero, how do you boost the economy at that point? Well, they came up with the idea of lowering long-term interest rates to boost the economy. And they come out with several ways of doing this, and one of them is options. And they also admit here that they sold huge amount of options around the 2000 mark, with the millennium change to reassure the markets. So they are in the business. Federal Reserve is in the business of selling derivatives. And that isn't shown in this balance sheet anywhere. Use of derivative instruments. Sell options and forwards on RPs with future settlements. Sell put options on Treasury securities. And I am sure that since 2008, this is how the United States keeps its long-term interest rates down on its Treasury securities. Is the Federal Reserve going out there secretly selling put options on treasuries to lower their price. But as the Federal Reserve indicates here, if this went wrong, if interest rates went up despite everything the Fed was doing, they could have catastrophic losses. And that's the scenario they're in right now. That's why they're desperately trying to control oil prices. I think they still have I think they weren't able to get out of it. Derivative position, put options that they've sold on Treasury securities. And that's why you have the Secretary of the Treasury saying we'll go out and buy bonds if we have to keep long-term interest rates down. Because, yeah, if they don't and long-term interest rates go up, they're going to have to pay out huge amounts on the derivatives they've sold. And they'll have catastrophic losses anyway. So if that's the alternative, you might as well go out and buy treasuries. It's cost you less than letting the derivatives, the put options that they've sold, get into the money. That's behind the scenes stuff. And I just wish, if there's anything, if any of you watching this can have any way to contact any of the economists out there on YouTube, let them know about this Federal Reserve transcript and the Fed's plan to sell put options on treasuries, because more people need to know about this.
Saudis, Kuwaitis, UAE, you name it, China. So if we're not getting that international participation in our bonds, somebody else has to buy them. The Fed is kind of off the gas pedal right now. So who's going to buy them? And it turns out that's why he said that crazy thing. We might use the Treasury General account, the TGA, which has about 936 billion parked in it right now. But that's where the government sort of like pays the bills out of, right? That's its checking account.
Yep.
And said, oh, we might use this to buy our own debt. Like, that's a weird.
That's why I'm pretty sure that they still have derivative exposure in the Treasury market, or the Fed does, from selling puts. And that's why they're doing. There's no financial crisis going on right now. So why are they trying so hard to prevent the yields on treasuries going up, as if it'd be some type of disaster? I think it's a derivative exposure. When you have $40 trillion worth of debt, you don't get low interest rates on your treasuries accidentally. They've been manipulating things, making people think treasuries are safer than they are by selling puts. And now that's blowing up in their face.
Thing? How do you... So that's a little bit like a... I don't know. What's my metaphor for this one?
Yeah, if you can tell any economist, that'd be good, because, yeah, people need to know. If you read these transcripts, it's obvious that they intend to do this. And they outlined 3 plans for lowering long-term yields. One of them is changing the composition of their balance sheet, buying more long-term debt. One of them is expanding the balance sheet to buy more long-term debt. And the third one is selling put options. They did the first 2. They already did the first 2 of their plan in this presentation. And this, of course, they'd be doing it secretly. So there's no way to officially know, but I think it's nearly guaranteed that they did this too.
They said, oh, we're going to do this because it's a cash management situation. Like the Treasury has too much cash, so we'll buy our own bonds back with our cash. That's a little weird, because if the Treasury has a cash management problem, Hunter Biden has a cocaine inventory problem, you know? Like, it's just, I don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah, I should make a library section on my Discord and put things like this in it. I agree.
Here, so it's all BS, but I'm really getting the sense, Mario, there's some real creaking and popping sounds, and it's in those long rates, and they're fighting a fight right now that they can't afford to lose, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to. If you lose the bond market, bad things happen. I mean, that's like
Yes, bad things happen if you lose bond market. But he's saying that in the context, he doesn't know that they might have sold a huge amount of put options on Treasury. So it could be far, far worse than he realizes.
The old map, there be monsters, you know, like nobody wants to get close to the edge of that map. And I'm getting the sense that that's actually what's propelling some of the behaviors we're seeing.
That is such an interesting observation. You never disappoint in our conversations. That is so interesting. So just if you can explain briefly for the audience what you mean, what bond vigilantes means.
So the bond vigilantes are crazy crew. So old saying on Wall Street, right? Stocks are...
It's basically people worried about inflation is the short and long of it. People worried about the inflation that are also buyers of bonds. So if normally they buy lots of bonds, but suddenly now they're worried about inflation, they're not willing to buy bonds anymore, or they sell the ones they have. That's basically what bond vigilantes are.
Are for show, but bonds are for dough. So everybody looks at the headlines. What's the Dow doing? What's the S&P? Lot of nobody ever talks about what the bond market's doing. It sits over there and it's huge and it's gigantic, but it moves at glacial speeds, 2 basis points, which is 0.02%, right? Just this tiny, just these little things. It's boring, right? But it's actually, what did James Carville said? He said, man, when I die, I don't want to come back as, I forget what he said, a tiger. He's like, I want to come back as the bond market because that scares everybody, So the bond market is actually this thing that's really important. And at the center of that, at the bottom of the whole pyramid of all the debt in the world sits the U.S. Treasuries, right? Largest, most liquid market. When you go to business school like I did.
Yeah, the most liquid market. I know that as of about 8 years ago, there was $4 trillion worth of treasuries backing the derivative market. One thing they did during the 2008 financial crisis is there was all these derivatives that were signed between banks that didn't have collateral behind them. They were just deals between banks. They changed that. So behind every option sold, put options, forward contract, etc., out there in derivative market that's sold, even like if you buy something on gold, like a call option on gold, it's an investment gold. Where does that money end up? U.S. Treasuries. And it's one of the places where a lot of the demand for treasuries come from. Until the derivative market collapses, it'll keep on generating more demand for U.S. Treasuries. But at one point, the Treasury market will collapse. That's not something that will happen in the near term. It's more towards the final stages, right before the dollar hyperinflates. I think that actually probably would be the trigger to the dollar hyperinflation, is the collapse of the derivative market.
You have to take all these tests and you have to do all these things, efficient market hypothesis, the Fama French things, all of them have this thing baked in called the risk-free rate. Risk-free rate of return. Is anything risk-free? Yeah, U.S. Treasury bonds. So that's just sitting there placidly for decades as just risk-free. If you give money to the U.S. government, you're going to get money back. It's in U.S. dollars.
Risk-free, not counting inflation. You're guaranteed to lose money to nothing else than inflation.
Dollars might have gone a little bit, but it'll be mostly well contained. So the bond market itself there in U.S. Treasuries is the beating heart of this whole system of debt-based money we have. And everything keys off of that. Everything. That 10-year rate, that's your car loan, your house, your mortgage payments. Everything keys off of that.
It used to be LIBOR, a secret agreement between banks that used to set this certain interest rate. But nowadays, I think it's a lot more off the 10-year Treasury.
Business loans, everything. So if that suddenly starts to get wonky, if you start to lose control of that, you lose control of everything. And that's the fear in this point in time. So the bond vigilantes are the people who are the big holders of that pile of debt. And if they lose faith, it's sort of like, it's a very small club. They call each other up and they're like, you want to hold 10-year debt? No, me neither, right? And so I think the warning shot across about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 now, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, not just
I thought it was Jamie Dimon
Bank, but JP Morgan, right? JP Morgan and Citi together hold about 75% of the capital stock of the Federal Reserve. They picked the Federal Reserve chairman. We're talking, when JP Morgan or Citi say something, I listen carefully. So Jamie Dimon came out and said, yeah, I'm not so hot on long dated U.S. government paper anymore, which is like them's fighting words in this business, right?
What did Dimon say?
You could look it up, but it's something, paraphrasing, but it was, I no longer, I'm not really, I don't think it's a good idea to hold, 10-year paper of the U.S. government anymore. Something like that. Long bonds. He said, long bonds.
Jamie Dimon said that.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yep, I agree. Especially with this Iran war. Absolutely terrible idea. You own a 30-year treasury. By the time that pays out at the end, I think inflation will have reduced the value of the dollars you get to practically nothing.
Exactly. It's one of those moments you're like, what you say? So that's an example of, so he's sort of speaking for the bond vigilante crowd, right? These are big funds, big giant holders of these bonds. And these people, they don't play politics. They're not partisan. They don't really care. It's just math. And so what math do they care about? Well, is inflation going to outstrip the value of my bonds? Because then I'm going to sell them because I don't want to hold them anymore. 2, do I believe that the U.S. government, which is the source of all inflation anyway, do they have a path towards fiscal restraint that I can believe in?
They don't.
And right now the answer is no. right? Nobody has that faith at this point in time. So that's why we're seeing long bonds really start to revolt. And so Scott Bessent, he intervenes, taking their treasury buyback program from $2 billion to $4 billion a week. And rates went down for like 24 hours and then went right back to where they were. So
these numbers, like, a lot of people make the argument that the trade.
I think the only reason the United States isn't in a debt spiral yet, with its 40 trillion national debt, is the AI bubble, or the promise of huge productivity gains from AI. That promise has everyone think, with those huge productivity gains, the United States will be able to pay off its debts. Once the AI bubble crashes, the AI will be useful long term, sure, but nowhere near as useful as people think it is right now. I think people will start really asking, how the hell is the United States ever going to pay back this 40 trillion? It's going to really undermine faith in U.S. treasuries, because people won't be able to see any way for U.S. to pay it back without printing money.
Treasury just doesn't have the capacity to control the bond market. A lot of bond traders were like offended in a way, where Bessent thinking the audacity of Bessent thinking he can decide what the 10-year bond yields will be. Like, who the hell is he? Does he know how big the bond market is? In a way, they're right.
Another way, Bessent and the Fed have probably been secretly manipulating the treasury market for years, so they figure they own it, they control it already. And he's probably thinking, these bankers, they don't understand how much manipulation I've been doing in these markets already.
who is Scott Bessent? Why, he's the man who blew up not one, but two hedge funds.
True,
Throw them into the dirt.
You saw those reports.
Yes. No, it's meaningful. No, but he comes off to me, and I could be reading him all wrong. He might have a public face that's different from who he is in private. I don't know him. But he comes off as saying, well, the yen is mispriced and bonds are mispriced and oil's mispriced. Like, he knows what the right price for everything is. Like, he knows. And that's the sort of hubris that gets you in trouble in this game quickly. So that's why I think we're seeing these op-eds coming out saying, hey, Scott, you got to be careful here. You're playing with something that's much bigger than anything you've touched before. And if you disappoint the bond vigilantes, they will suddenly, interest rates, you lose control of that. Once you've lost control, very hard to get it back. We call that basically 1980, right? So we had one...
Yeah, 1980s. The inflation spiral we were in 1980. Historical. United States dollar was spiraling out of control in the 1980s. World War II inflation. See inflation going up and up and up and up. Right here. Imagine, take a break here and draw a line straight up. Hyperinflation. That's what we were heading to. But somehow magically, deficits stopped mattering. Because right here, the United States decided to run record deficits. And inflation fell. Magically. Of course, the real answer to why that happened is... the Treasury and the Fed figured out there is a way to print money without causing inflation. You just print the money. That money gets smuggled out of the country and then circulates in, say, Nicaragua. And then you don't have any inflation in the United States, because what matters is the dollars in circulation in the U.S. If you print money and it disappears overseas, no inflation. And that's how, through Iran-Contra, drug trafficking, huge billions and billions of dollars started heading overseas. And ever since then, our lack of inflation is because of the dollarization of the world that happened. All these places that, through mostly drug smuggling, got flooding tons of dollars. And like they used to use the US dollar, for example, in Afghanistan. That's the one place in the world that's de-dollarized since then, so... And then that's the other danger. As places de-dollarize, like Afghanistan did, then those dollars come back to the United States and it causes inflation. So we have a lot of pent-up inflation from all those dollars overseas that we're going to have to deal with at some point in time. Probably in the relative near term, too.
Pump of inflation, 73 to 78. Little calm period there for a year. And then from 79 to 82, 83, we had this other hump of inflation. Peaked out at 14%. The Federal Reserve had to raise interest rates to 21% on the short end to get that back under control, 14% on the long end. It was very painful. We could not possibly survive.
What year was that?
That was 1980 would have been the peak of that second hump, right? And for a lot of reasons, it kind of rhymed with today, right? We had this war we were fighting, Vietnam, that we hadn't really, we sort of just spent for that. We had out of control deficit spending. Plus, we had this little thing called the oil embargo that kicked off a bunch of inflation from 73 to 74, but it kicked off inflation that ran for a couple of years because oil went from 370 a barrel to 33 a barrel. That would have been like going from 60 to 700 a barrel if things had, ripped the same this time around.
Yep.
The problem this time, though, is when you have higher yields, higher interest rates, is that the amount of debt that the U.S. has. So this time around...
Yes, both private and public debt in the United States is crazy. You push interest rates up, everything starts to break.
Compared to decades ago, any small increase in those yields could have a pretty significant impact.
It would have a huge impact, particularly because under Janet Yellen and then continued a little bit under Jay Powell, and now Bessent is actually, he criticized them for this, but now he's doing the same thing, which is issuing less long paper. In fact, he's buying long paper to retire from the market, but that means he has to put more out on the short end. So when you put paper out on the short end, that means that if interest rates go up, like you get immediately clocked for that. If you have a 10-year piece of paper yielding 2%, you have to pay 2% on it for 10 years, right?
Yep.
So he's retiring paper that's yielding 2, 1.5, even below 1%. And now replacing that, though, by having to sell corresponding bills, treasury bills, which is, 28-day paper up to a year, right? Short. So it'd be like if I said, look, I have a 30...
The TLDR of this is basically as all these long-term treasuries expire and the treasury has to roll them over, it's drastically increasing the funding costs of the U.S. government at a time where we're doing the war in Iran and wasting billions, trillions of dollars.
Your mortgage, I was lucky. I locked it in at 2.5%. I'm going to ditch that. Get a little money off the table, but I'm going to replace it with a 5% mortgage. Yeah. It's not a... It's literally, it's just a can-kicking adventure, but it's going to lead to a lot of trouble.
This is the definition of kicking can down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Democracies are all about can kicking. Kick the can down till the next administration.
The point you were making earlier, linking this to Russia, and by the way, talking about Russia, a report just came in. Fresh U.S. intelligence indicates that the Kremlin sees Washington as weakened by the 6-month war with Iran and may view this...
Well, Washington is weakened by the 6 months war with Iran. All those bombs we dropped on Iran are not available to drop on Russia.
Situation as an opportunity to escalate against U.S. interests and allies in Europe. The intelligence preceded CIA Director Ratcliffe's visit to Moscow and comes amid concerns over depleted U.S. military stockpiles and Patriot interceptors and Tomahawk missiles following the war in Iran. Ratcliffe reportedly warned Russian officials against significantly escalating the war in Ukraine, arguing that such a move would backfire by pushing Trump closer to Zelensky. But the point you were making...
Pushing Trump closer to Zelensky? Trump is already giving Zelensky everything he can. Like, the reason he isn't giving interceptor missiles is he doesn't have them. But he's going along selling all the weapons that Europe wants to buy to give to Ukraine. Ukraine is still getting all the support Trump can give. Even if Russia provoked Trump, what's Trump going to do? Give the Tomahawks that are in critically short supply to Ukraine? I don't think so.
Earlier is that. Sorry,
why is that? Why is that? Why did this? Why would the CIA deliver that message? Isn't that the State Department?
I don't know. Something weird's going on.
I'm not used to. I mean, listen. I don't know how the behind the scenes stuff works. I only know what they tell me. But I'm not used to the CIA director delivering these.
We just watched a video on that. The best guess or to what happened is the situation in Ukraine is getting very, very bad, and the head of CIA went to Russia to propose making Donbass what's it? Not border zone. It's a territory, a no man's land, controlled by no one. Yeah, basically something Russia rejected right away. It was another desperate attempt because this Ukraine war is the CIA's war, And so the CIA was basically trying to get Russia to back off to agree to a ceasefire, and it failed.
Sorts of messages.
Do you think it was a positive message or a concerning one? Is it what's more likely in your view? A message that they could
Given how fast he left, it's a message that was rejected.
be approaching a deal, or a message that, hey, don't escalate, don't strike? Because you remember they're threatening to strike the UK. They're escalating on Ukraine. We just talked about the amount of sirens today, were the most since the invasion begun. If you had to make a bet, is it positive message or negative message or positive?
By the way, Russia's upgraded this Ukrainian venture from a special military operation to a full war, I think just in the last month. So they're not playing around anymore.
Reasons or negative ones? In other words, ending the war or risk of escalating, trying to prevent escalation?
It was just wild speculation, but the only reason I would send the CIA is because the CIA has some kind of information that they have, sources and methods that they have to keep close to the vest, and they don't want to share it with State Department and tell them how they know what they know. But they got to go over and they got to relay a very important message to Russia about something to either gain something or prevent something. It's going to be one of those things. But I mean, it's pretty clear to me that the Russia doesn't have ambitions beyond Ukraine, or didn't until all these economic attacks began on the wild berries plants and
Yes, all those attacks, and also on just innocent civilians, like people lying on the beach, drone flies into them, kills 6, that type of thing. Yeah, a lot of anger from that.
and all the economic attacks on their refineries and all this and that. So if Putin has got to be facing some hardline pressure inside Russia to say,
Yes.
hey, we've got these beautiful Oreshnik missiles or other things. Why don't we just take it to the enemy? Take it to the hoop once here. And so I'm sure he's being restrained. That's my read of it at this point in time. But the pressure's building. I'm going to guess that Ratcliffe has some information about something that they were kind of hoping we could give a little, get a little, because we need help with Iran. We got to get out of that. We need that off the table. Big mistake. Just how do we get out of there and make it look okay? Gets harder if
There is no way to get out of Iran. With that is good for Trump. That was the whole thing. As soon as you bomb Supreme Leader, you're fucked.
Russia's providing material support because, Ukraine, you mentioned, probably has the best fighting force in Europe right now on that side of things. But Russia has the most battle-hardened force in the world on their side of things. So
Sorry.
I can see that happening. Help. We'll give you something. Ukraine, you mentioned, probably has the best fighting force in Europe right now on that side of things. But Russia has the most battle-hardened force in the world on their side of things.
They do.
So I can see that happening. Help. We'll give you something.
So when you were explaining, the energy markets and what Best Center's doing, it got me thinking. If you look at the swap lines that the US gave the UAE a few months ago, and now the same thing in Japan, it got me thinking on how much leverage countries that hold a lot of US treasuries have on the US. So, for example, if the UK thought, if Trump was threatening to stop giving intelligence to Ukraine or halt all military exports to Ukraine, and the UK doesn't want that, or move military assets from Europe, and the UK and other European countries are not happy from that, can you imagine a scenario where they would threaten behind the scenes to sell US treasuries if the US goes ahead with this? In other words, could they, could they hold the US hostage in some way with those treasuries? Because we saw that. The reason I was thinking of that is because of what's happened in Japan. Japan's like, I know it's different, very, very different. Japan's not doing it to punish the US. Japan just needs to support its currency. But with the US scrambling to offer that swap line and to do the bailout on the behalf of Japan, it's a reminder of how worried the US is for other countries selling their treasuries, and rightly so.
Yeah. Well, first off, treasuries aren't like apples. I don't have like a bag of apples. I'm going to go sell these up the street,
Yeah. The Iran war has messed up the funding of U.S. treasuries in several ways. One, all these Middle East regimes, U.S. puppets, normally sold their oil in dollars and then invested everything in U.S. treasuries, or the majority of it. Then you had Japan that had a trade surplus. And that means when it sold goods abroad, it got more money than when it bought goods. So since everything is done in dollars, that means at the end of the year, they have a surplus of dollars. What did they do with that? They plunged that into U.S. treasuries. And so you had buying in Middle East and Japan, for example. of U.S. Treasuries. Now, because of closure of Strait of Hormuz, and all damage to the Gulf states, they aren't buying Treasuries the way they are. They need that money, and so a lot of demand for Treasuries from there has disappeared. Whereas Japan, because of the high cost of oil, and they import 90% of their oil, now doesn't have a trade surplus anymore. It has a trade deficit. It needs dollars, and so it needs to sell its Treasuries and use those dollars to make up the shortfall in its trade to protect its currency. And that creates selling pressure on Treasuries instead of demand. So that's just a few ways the Iran war is fucking up the Treasury market. So far, they've managed to stabilize the Japanese yen without the selling of a huge amount of Treasuries. But if this goes on for a while, who knows?
So when we say there are foreign holders of treasuries, for the most part, those are not in those countries. They're here in custody accounts held in the United States. So if the United States suddenly got the wind that, Czechoslovakia was going to dump all its treasuries and we didn't want them to do that, it's pretty easy to prevent that from happening.
It's actually the Federal Reserve that acts on behalf of foreign central banks. The open market guy at the Federal Reserve, he acts on behalf of three parties: the Federal Reserve, foreign central banks, and the U.S. Treasury, specifically the Exchange Stabilization Fund. We'll not talk about that one for now, but foreign central banks, yeah, Fed is the one fulfilling their order. You know how when you sell a stock, you give it to your broker and your broker fulfills that transaction? Well, foreign central banks, they give that order to the U.S. Fed, and the U.S. Fed does the buying and selling. It's the one that holds the treasuries on behalf of foreign central banks. So theoretically, the Fed could go, "Oh, Japan, you want to sell all your treasuries? Well, I might not do that right now." Of course, that create all kinds of problems and panic about foreign central banks not being able to access their treasuries or their money at the Fed, but it could theoretically do that.
It would send shockwaves, of course, right? Because the deal is so, but there have been a lot of shockwaves, right? 2022, when the SWIFT system was weaponized to prevent Russia from accessing its sovereign reserves, proving they weren't sovereign or reserves. That was a shockwave. We're still dealing with it. Kicked off gold. It kicked off all the BRICS countries doing cross-border settlements, setting up their own settlement systems. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can ever reel that back in. So when you wield something as big as the SWIFT system, I mean, there's levels to this game, right? So at the top level, the agreement is that countries' sovereign reserves are kind of theirs. It'd been hands off until February of 2022. And then that changed things, and we're living with the after effects. If the United States suddenly said, we're going to prevent you from selling your bonds, UK, like you've decided to punish us.
Yeah, they could do that, because it's just like you call up your broker, let's say Goldman Sachs, say, I want to sell all my treasuries. And then Goldman Sachs say, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Nice, we hear your order, we're just not going to fill it. Yeah, that would be Treasury doing that equivalent to foreign central banks. It wouldn't go down well. There'd be lawsuits, but ultimately, yeah, the Fed is the one selling treasuries on behalf of foreign central banks, and the Fed could delay those sales, the one that controls those sales, could decide not to do those, although that would create absolute panic.
With that, or China or Japan. If we prevent that from happening, now we have to wander over to the fact that the United States is a debtor nation, and we have an $800 billion a year trade deficit, mostly for stuff we really need. Maybe some stuff we want, flat screen TVs and sneakers, but some stuff we really need that we don't manufacture here and we can't reshore quickly. So if we all of a sudden said to the rest...
We outsourced our manufacturing sector. We make the equivalent of jack shit here in the United States. And the only thing we make here are things that are really heavy to move and ship, like concrete. We make concrete here in the United States because it doesn't make sense to make that in China and ship it over. Too heavy.
Rest of the world, we're now going to weaponize the treasuries that you might hold. Well, what happens? So we buy something from somebody. They get dollars. And that company says, I don't want these. They give them to their central bank. The central bank is like, well, normally what I would do is I would put those in treasuries. But since that's not safe anymore, I guess I'll just emit these out into the open market. Either just sell them for other currencies or trade them for...
By the way, the Fed not deciding to do what foreign central banks want. If Japan, for example, told Fed, sell our 1 trillion treasuries, all of them right now, that would crash the treasury market. that much demand, that many treasuries just flooded out right away, it would push back. So if there's ever a panic and tons of central banks start wanting to sell treasuries at the same time in an amount that the treasury market can't absorb, I can see a situation where the Fed would do the same thing hedge funds do when all the investors want to head for the door at the same time, which is put limits on what can be sold and how much money central banks can get.
Oil or gold or whatever they want. If that process starts, I think you then attach a rocket motor to the U.S. dollar on the downslope of the roller coaster it seems to be on. It's really complicated how this sort of fits together.
It's complicated, but there's no solution to it. All the past, when you have $40 trillion in debt, there's no magical way to pay that off without crashing your currency. It just you could just delay things a little bit.
Man, I'm just doing a deep dive into the euro dollar. Holy shit, how convoluted it all is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So complex.
The funny thing about the euro dollar is a lot of the euro dollar isn't in Europe. It basically refers to any banks outside the United States that have deposits denominated in dollars. And there's a lot of them all over the world.
And when you have the people that...
You want to know what's happening on the backside? So there was Justin Bloomberg came out like 3 days ago, that China just casually announces that they have set up in Hong Kong, onshore, as well as offshore gold exchanges where they're like, hey, if you have yuan, we have these gold repositories and you can just swap them. And that's not a gold standard. They haven't said we fixed the rate of yuan against gold,
That is their way of setting up a payment system like SWIFT for settling trade balances while still controlling their currency. It means that if China has a trade deficit with a country or trade surplus, instead of that being settled in holding currency of the country, like owing yuan, it all gets settled in gold instead. I think it's a pretty smart way of China to keep their currency undervalued and to avoid becoming like the reserve currency when it doesn't want to.
1,000 yuan for gram or whatever. But they've set up these places where if you happen to have excess yuan, you can trade them in for gold right here, right? And so the most important part of a debt-based fiat currency, and all of them are that, is trust. You have to have trust in it. So when people lose faith, so this is kind of like the undercurrent to all of this, is like watching the Treasury Department get basically slapped by the markets, watching the loss of reputation for the United States in the Middle East where the whole petrodollar thing was all set up and running, and then watching China's response to that say, hey, don't trust us, but we have this gold-based system over here that you can just swap in and out of anytime you want, They clearly understand that.
That's one reason gold prices keep going up and up.
That reputation and the trust is really important.
They're playing.
If the United States did something really stupid, like weaponize the treasuries, that would take out, I think, the last leg of trust in that system.
Which is,
But they will do it at some point in time, because at some point in time there will start to be panic. Some event will set up some panic about treasuries and the dollar. And if all central banks start trying to head for the exit at the same time and starts trying to sell the treasuries at the same time, in order to prevent an immediate collapse of the dollar, the Fed will have to put restrictions on the selling of treasuries, which will work in the terms of like next month. It might prevent the dollar from crashing, but over the next year, the dollar would start plummeting.
the trust is, there's all these different pillars about the network effect and the size of the US dollar and the euro dollar system. I understand all that. But I think currency works because people trust it. And it all comes down to trust. And the US is...
And a pillar to that trust is the media empire run by the United States, basically. The worldwide, global, let's call it propaganda network or whatever. The US-dominated media. That media, the one that, covers up migrant crimes or the Epstein files, etc., that will keep on propping up the dollar and saying the dollar is where you should put your money right up until the bitter end, right up until the dollar starts losing all its value. So that's a good thing, is the propaganda network will go down at the same time as the dollar, or it will go down before the dollar collapses. It's a prerequisite. Like foreign central banks selling all their treasuries, that only happens after they completely lose faith in the U.S. mainstream media.
It's just been chipping away the trust they have weaponizing it time and time again. And they're playing with fire. You just don't know at what stage you weaponize it, where it's just you've just gone that one step too far. And one of my other guests who always references you as well,
I have not been paying attention to Nepal. So much else to keep track of. I can look into that afterwards.
Pilkington said when it, no, it was you who said that. Sorry, it was you last week. He's like, when it cascades. I've used that reference a lot, and you talked about the hockey stick chart of America's national debt and the law of parabolic returns or parabolic growth or whatever you called it.
Exponential growth. Yes.
Exponential growth. Yeah, I use the word parabolic. But when it scales, it scales. And when it happens, it happens, and you just get an avalanche of just sell pressure and just all falls apart. Now that might never happen. Like, why take the risk? You don't need, the US doesn't need to do this, but it does. Now we've got economic D-Day, which everyone forgot about.
Oh yeah, but this is a really important concept. So,
yeah, it is. Economic D-Day. Wait, that's old news. They're done with that.
No, this is really important. So when you see a murmuration of starlings, that beautiful thing where they're flying around, nobody can really figure out, like, why do they all go left? A school of fish suddenly, goes to the right. In human behavior, this is really important because markets are a function of both the reality, right? So there's a reality of inflation, it's got some reality behind it. Like, there's too much money for goods and services. So
yeah, there is reality behind inflation.
It's got some pressure, right? That's the reality. But then there's the expectations about it.
Expectations, so important because it's a multiplier. The speed of money through the economy and the supply of money give you inflation. If you print a lot of money, but it's moving very slowly through the economy, then the inflation's rather moderate. If you have a lot of money moving really fast through the economy, then that's hyperinflation. That's when you get to the point, like they did in Kenya during the hyperinflation there, where people are of the mindset of, when it's nighttime, buy something, anything, to get rid of or it was Zimbabwe dollars. Buy anything to get rid of your Zimbabwe dollars, because you know that by the time morning comes around, those dollars will be worth less. That you have money flying when you reach that point, and prices just soar.
That people hold. So you and I, we see prices rising a little bit, fine. We sort of deal and adjust. But if you and I both suddenly hold the idea that next year prices are going to be 100% higher, because that's our expectation. In Fed speak, our expectation has now become unanchored, right? Like, then we just spend our money as fast as possible, and it makes inflation actually shoot to the moon. So,
because a lot of people have savings in the United States. Yes, there are a lot of people that live day to day, but there's still a lot of people that have savings for college. If they believe that those savings are going to lose, if the inflation goes over 10%, then maybe I'll buy my new computer now. Maybe I'll buy my new car now. Maybe I'll stock up on 6 months of groceries. And you suddenly have a huge percent of your population that decide to stock up on 6 months of groceries. What do you think that does to food prices? Do you understand? That's how inflation expectations can accelerate prices going upwards.
It's both the reality and then that expectation component.
It becomes a self-fulfilling reality in a way.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the key here is
that's why the Fed, ever since like the 1960s, has been harping on inflation expectations so hard and trying to manage it. And a huge part of that actually is lying and controlling the media message. They now recognize that, that's what you need to do to control inflation, is you need to convince people that that money isn't being printed even when it is. That's how you keep it down. Their mainstream media is losing its hold. More and more people distrust it. And makes it a lot harder to control inflation expectations.
That when things move from sort of private knowledge to common knowledge, which I think we talked about, but this is really important in market psychology, which is that if, a whole bunch of hedge fund guys and some big money, family office people, sovereign wealth funds, they talk to each other like, I get a little nervous about inflation. Still private knowledge. All of a sudden, some emissary comes out like Ray Dalio or somebody's like, it says, it's over. Inflation is now loosed upon the world. And it becomes common knowledge. That's when behavior changes. That's when the school of fish janks left or right, So that expectation part is the unknowable. It just sort of happens and just sort of emerges one day, But I can feel it coming.
Yes, I know it's coming because this Iran war and the food crisis next year it's a food crisis combined with a oil fuel crisis. It's going to push, I think, inflation in the double digits in the United States. That's the reality that's going to be next year. And that is the threshold, I think another commentator has mentioned, where people start to really notice it and start to change their behavior. And you're going to have commenters like Asmongold cover at some point the huge increase in prices. And yeah, it's inflation expectations are going to become unmoored.
And I can feel the change in the air. And so we'll call it bond vigilantes for the moment. But you can feel the big money starting to get nervous. And it doesn't really matter what you or I do. No offense. But when the big money gets nervous, things can change really quickly. And so that's the thing that can't get started because
yeah, that's the thing. The big money, the 1% or the 0.1%, very rich, when they get worried about inflation, that drives interest rates up because they start selling their bonds. That's how inflation expectations affect that 1%. The 99%, like you and me, when we start to think there's going to be inflation, what we do is we start buying things that we're worried their prices are going to go up. Like, oh, computers are going to be twice as much next year? Well, then I'll buy it now. And so, inflation expectations of the masses actually amplify inflation, make it worse. If people believe there's going to be inflation, they buy more, inflation gets worse. When the 1% believes there's going to be inflation, that's only a problem for the financial markets. It just means bond yields go up.
it does, it's almost impossible to stop before it burns out.
Agree. Chris, always a pleasure. Thank you.
This was a pleasure for me too. Always like Chris Martenson. I think he has a very good grasp on nearly everything. He doesn't know about this. And the Fed shenanigans in the derivative markets. I think if he were to read this, it would change his opinion on a lot of things, and he would be a lot more worried than he currently is. Because if the Fed is doing shenanigans in derivative markets, that can... You know how a hedge fund blows up because of derivatives? Well, if that hedge fund blowing up is the Federal Reserve, the consequences are a little bit bigger. One day, this will become more well known. It's really something that should be plastered on every financial paper, and yet no one knows it. It's right there on the Federal Reserve's website since 2008. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe, can watch on Kick or Twitch, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.